Hello everyone and welcome back to the FIDE Grand Swiss. We have an excellent game between Javokhir, Sindarov and Vidit Gujrathi. Sindarov just defeated Samuel Sevian. We've seen how he did it in the previous video with the black pieces. It was absolutely incredible. Can he use some of that complicated chess to take down a 2700 player like Vidit Gujrathi? So let's check it out. Sindarov has the white pieces and he opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6 and bishop to c4. We have bishop to c5 going for the Giuoco piano, and now pawn to d3. Some players from Uzbekistan have been seen playing the Evans Gambit, so I thought maybe Javokhir will go for it, but no, he goes for d3, the Giuoco Pianissimo variation, d6 and c3. And here there are a lot of moves that are possible and that are played, like bishop to g4, knight to f6 is played here, even h6 is played here, some other moves as well. But here we have bishop back to b6. It's a very rare move, but it has been used by Wesley So to defeat none other than Alireza Firuza in this year's Superbet Chess Classic. So obviously it can be played. We have castles and now knight to f6. We have pawn to a4, preparing to advance those pawns even further. So pawn to a5, stopping b4, and the bishop to e3, countering the strong dark square bishop. So we have a trade, captures, and here we have castles kingside, knight b to d2, and now there is a game where queen to e7 was played, but here we have knight to e7 by Vidit, and it is now, as of move 10, that we have a completely new game. So okay, knight to h4, the knight of course wants to come to f5, and you cannot prevent it with g6 for the moment, as the knight on f6 would be undefended. So here we have pawn to d5 instead. You could also prepare it with pawn to c6, Vidit decides to go for it right away. E captures on d5, we have knight e captures on d5, and now queen to f3, as knight captures on e3 is a threat. Even if you play e4, knight to e3 is still a threat, so queen f3, and now knight to b6. Very annoying, putting pressure on the light square bishop. You can't really move it back as the d3 pawn would fall. So we have pawn to e4, the queen now guarding the d3 pawn, and queen to d6 now. We have queen back to e2 and bishop to g4, attacking the queen. So okay, you made room for the knight on f3, and now rook 8 to d8, putting more pressure on that d3 pawn. We have pawn to h3, bishop to h5, and now completely unpinning with pawn to g4. Bishop to g6, and now rook f to d1, adding more support to the d pawn. Knight f to d7, preparing knight to c5 to add more pressure to the d3 pawn, and now bishop to b3 finally. So what's the idea behind this bishop to b3 maneuver? Is the d3 pawn for the moment is defended, as the knight was placed on d7, so it disconnected the queen and the rook, but now comes knight to c5, and now there's a attack on the bishop and a triple attack on that d3 pawn. So we have knight to c4 attacking the black queen, and queen to f6, and now although it seems like you should play bishop to c2 add more support here, the move is actually bishop to a2. If you play this, then knight captures on c4, and your entire pawn structure is completely messed up. If queen to b6, putting pressure on the king on g1, threatening all sorts of nasty discoveries, and also threatening queen captures on b2. You cannot even save it with something like queen e3 to put pressure on the knight, because still queen captures on b2 happens. And now if you capture on c5, then the black queen just gobbles up the bishop. And now look at white's pawn structure, it would be just unplayable. So instead, bishop to a2 is the only move that keeps the Javokhir in the game. Rook f to e8, and now we have king to g2. We have knight b captures on a4, giving up the a pawn for the central pawn. Pawn to h4, now threatening to trap the bishop on g6, and now queen to f4. Now, can you trap the bishop here? Well, not really, as the g4 pawn is hanging. So here we have knight c captures on e5, while capturing, also defending the pawn on g4. Rook captures on e5, giving up sort of the rook for two knights, but Javokhir is of course hoping that he will still trap the bishop with h5. However, that's not going to happen. Knight captures on e5, queen captures and pawn to h5, but now rook captures on d3. And look at this very annoying move. Now, if you don't do anything, also bishop captures on e4 is now possible. There's no d3 pawn defending that e4 pawn. So the entire game is basically the battle for the d3 pawn, and in the end, Vidit emerges on top. And now, if you go for bishop captures, if you go for h captures bishop with h captures on g6, then just queen g3 check, and now you will lose the queen after rook to f3. The white queen will have to sacrifice itself for the rook on f3. So instead, after rook captures on d3, Javokhir's only idea is bishop captures on f7, but Vidit doesn't take it, although you could take king to f8 is just more precise. And now we have rook captures on d3, and it seems like white solved all of his problems, but there is one move that completely shatters White's game. So feel free to pause the video and try to find this only move while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on not going for anything weird like bishop captures on e4. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is knight captures on d3. That's the move. Even though it seems like bishop captures on e4 is what you should be playing, then rook f3. And now the bishop is defended, so you don't have a good move here. If bishop captures, queen captures, again the bishop is defended, you're just down material and you're going to lose this. But if you found knight captures on d3, that's a whole different story. Now white can't just play anything because knight to f4 will fork the queen and the king here. So queen to e3 was played, or you capture, but that's also very bad as the bishop now forks the queen and the king. So here we have queen to e3, and now just queen captures on e4. Going for the queen trade, queen captures, bishop captures with check, and now king to g3. And now there are a couple of ways you could play this. You could capture this pawn, and then after that just go after this pawn, so that's possible. But instead Vidit goes for king captures on f7. It's still gonna result in him having a bishop and knight for a rook, but the other way was maybe a bit more precise. Rook captures, we have bishop to c6, rook captures on a5, and now knight captures on b2. We have rook to f5 with check, king to e7, and now rook to e5 with check. Now Javokhir would very much enjoy a perpetual here, but Vidit says nope, we play on king to g8. Rook to e5, and now knight to a4. Going after the pawn here, c4, and again knight to b6, going after the pawn here. Now you could advance it all the way to c5, but then knight d7, attacking the rook and the pawn, and the rook will be... well, you will not be able to keep defending it, as the rook will just get attacked too much, and then you're going to pick up the pawn. So instead, after knight b6, g5 was played, now hoping for, well, there's really nothing to hope for here, but maybe if this pawn gets on g6 and you get some sort of a rook d8 check, it maybe could result in checkmate. Of course, he's not hoping that that will happen, but maybe he's hoping that a certain position that will allow a certain tactic that might be used to make this useful will appear. Well, that is possible, of course. But king to f7, with this move, time control has been reached. Rook to f5 with check, king to e7, and now rook to e5 check. King to d8, and now rook to f5. Now trying to go after the king side pawns. So king to e7 and rook to e5 with check. Vidit will have to figure out how to go through this. King d6, rook to f5, and now king to e6. We have rook to f8, and now knight captures on c4. So rook to h8, going after the h7 pawn. Now comes knight to d6. So now the knight is in range of all the checks, so white has to be careful. Rook captures on h7, and now bishop to e4. And that's the idea, of course. Rook captures on g7 is impossible, because if you capture it, then knight to f5 check will pick up the rook here. So g6 was played, and now we have pawn to b5. Now Vidit starts marching forward with his pawns. King to f4, and now pawn to b4. We have rook to h8, you have to get the rook back into the game. Pawn to b3. You have rook to b8, always put a rook behind the passed pawn, and now bishop to d5, defending the passed pawn on b3, king e3, and now pawn to b2. Even again, the knight is in the right place. If you capture, of course, a fork wins you the game. So pawn to h6, creating a passed pawn on the king side, but it doesn't help you all that much. You can't push because the king just goes after the pawn. So instead, king to d4, stopping the black king from going after the pawn, as the bishop will be hanging, but now now just knight to f5 with check, king to c5, and here pawn to c6 defending the bishop. We have rook captures on b2, but now just king to f6, and he was in this position on move 57 that Javokhir Sindarov resigned the game. As there is nothing more to be done here. For those of you who like it when I show why is that, well, because after white plays something, and there's really nothing you can play, you cannot do anything here. The pawn and bishop are guarding themselves, and the king will capture the pawn on the next move. So that is unstoppable. Rook g2 is impossible because the bishop covers that. So you're going to have to play something, doesn't matter what. The king will capture the pawn. Now you're going to play something else, and now the pawn starts marching forward. If you start going with the king, king to g5, king to c3, again, the pawn marches forward. Even king to g4. If king to d2, pawn to h4, king to e2, king to g3, and notice that of course the bishop is covering the queening square and the king covering the h2 square. That's pretty much it. Rook f2, pawn to h3, and that's it. h2, h1, white will have to give up the rook for this pawn, and then the knight and bishop will be able to escort a pawn, or black even, if black wants to be fancy about it, he can even give up the pawn and then deliver a knight, bishop, and king checkmate. So yeah, very nicely done by Vidit, and with this victory, as a lot of the other games were drawn, Vidit is the sole leader after 7 rounds, and will have very, very good chances of actually winning the tournament, but his opponent in the next round is Hikaru Nakamura, who is on 5 points, so, you know, it's gonna be tough. Vidit does have the white pieces, so, you know, it should be a great game. Vidit will probably play the best game he ever played with the white pieces, and he should if he wants to win this event. But yeah, some of the other pairings: Fabi will be facing Etienne Bacro, Esipenko will be facing Vincent Keimer, Eric Gacy will be facing Kuzubov, Bogdan Daniel Dak will be facing Wojtaszek, Pretke will be facing Ferosev, Sevian Firuja, Sarana Raport, Aronian Niemann, and Cheparinov will be facing Duda. So those are the top 10 boards. We'll see how it goes, and as usual, you know, use hashtag suggestion if you want to see some of the games, and even if you want to see some of the games from the previous rounds that I haven't covered, use also hashtag suggestion, and I might be able to cover them after the tournament finishes. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Very nicely done by Vidit. Always incredible playing like that with the black pieces. Javokhir always plays complicated chess and wins. This time he played a bit too complicated, it would seem, even for himself. So yeah, once again, really hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank the Brooders on Spotify, Stephen McCann, Chess Beats League, Romain Manini, and Sam's Giant Tortoise Farm for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.